The story begins with a man being rushed to the emergency room. He is dying, but his only regret is that he is a virgin. He opens his eyes and is surprised to see a young couple before him. He doesn't understand and finds it unbelievable when the man lifts him and smothers his face with kisses. He is ready to forgive this man's ridiculous behavior as soon as he sees a woman who is blushing. He has never been with a woman, so he thinks his dream is finally coming true. Unable to resist groping her, he lifts his hands, his tiny little hands. He gasps as he realizes he has been born again. However, he still possesses his wits from his past life. His parents are Paul and Zenith Greyrat, a young couple in their early 20s. They name him Rudeus Greyrat, and as time goes on, Rudeus makes the best of his excellent memory. He has learned much about their language so far, but he can hardly keep it in his pants. He would often be found near the laundry bucket wearing women's underpants on his head. He is particularly fascinated by the maid Lilia, who thinks Rudeus is possessed because of his behavior. Rudeus can't figure out which era he has been born into, as they still use fire to prepare food, and candles to light the room. One day he climbs on the stool to take a peek at the outside world through the window, and is mesmerized by Paul practicing sword fighting. But Rudeus loses his balance and falls on the floor with a thud. Zenith and Lilia run to help Rudeus, who surprisingly doesn't cry. But to ensure her son is fine, Zenith casts a spell on him to make the pain disappear. This is the first time Rudeus is introduced to magic, and he realizes he is not on Earth as he initially thought, but in a world with swords and sorcery. Rudeus grows stronger day by day, and one day he stumbles upon a set of 5 books stacked away in an old chest. He is instantly attracted to these books as he claims to be a book lover who owned more than 1,000 books in his previous life, even if they were pornos. He soon realizes he can't read the characters, and to read these 5 books, he needs to learn a new language. A year has passed since, and Rudeus can now read the characters to some extent as Paul occasionally reads the books to him. One of the books is The Magic Manual, which Rudeus is currently reading. He tries to find out if he possesses magical powers and blatantly recites a spell thinking he will fly, but instead he ends up making a water ball. Now that he knows he definitely has the power, he tries again. Using his skill of combining combo attacks as he did while playing video games in his past life, he creates another water ball. He is surprised that he could do it without chanting the spell, but that is all his little body can take, and he soon passes out and the water ball lands on his pants. Zenith holds an embarrassed Rudeus and comforts him as she thinks he wet his pants, but he can't explain what actually happened. As he grows, he keeps practicing using magic without chanting. He questions the authenticity of what is written in the book, as it says the spell should be chanted before casting the magic, but he can do it without uttering a single word. Rudeus knows his magic has gotten stronger, and he wonders if there is a limit to that, but it is too early to assess it. He would be lying if the thought of being special didn't cross his mind. He theorizes if he keeps training, his powers will grow leaps and bounds by the time he reaches adulthood. So he decides to train hard until his growth period ends and finally manages to make his water balls fly. He jumps and celebrates because his hard work is paying off, and he has mastered entry-level magic. Feeling motivated, Rudeus thinks it is time to move on to intermediate magic. He reads a chant aloud and inadvertently creates a massive water ball that he sends flying several feet ahead, and in the process, destroys the entire wall of the attic. Hearing the loud noise, his parents and Lilia rush to see what happened. While Paul thinks it was a monster attack, Zenith figures out what must have happened. Rudeus thinks he'll be reprimanded for using magic, but to his surprise, Zenith squeals in delight. She wants Paul to hire a teacher for their son, whom she considers a genius, but Paul reminds her of her promise of making their son adept at sword fighting. Lilia puts an end to their argument by suggesting Rudeus take both classes at different times of the day. They send word out and get a response. Unlike what they had imagined, a very young girl stands at their doorstep, and she introduces herself as Roxy Magurdia. Rudeus is more than happy to be trained by her, and if given a chance, he also wants to marry her. Roxy is skeptical about Rudeus being special because every parent thinks their child is special, but she changes her view once she gets to know Rudeus and sees him using magic without chanting the spell. Their first day of training involves destroying and healing Zenith's tree, much to the mum's displeasure. After the training, Zenith invites Roxy to join them for dinner. They have prepared a feast, and after a long time, Rudeus feels lively and blessed to have gotten a second chance in life. He is ready to move forward and work hard to make the most of what he has, unlike in his previous life, which went to waste. He is ready for a restart. In a flashback at his father's funeral, while everybody was mourning, pre-reincarnated Rudeus was busy rubbing one out in his very filthy room. His siblings had had enough, and he was thrown out of his house that day. It was raining heavily. and he didn't know where to go, so he kept walking and stopped at a traffic signal. A group of 3 students arguing on the opposite side of the road caught his attention, and before he knew it, he leapt in front of the speeding truck heading towards them, and everything went bright. Rudeus wakes up with a jerk and realizes he was dreaming of the last moments of his previous life. He had fallen asleep after running out of mana while practicing earth magic. It has been 1.5 years since Roxy arrived at his house, and he has learned a lot of intermediate magic from her. However, he would occasionally struggle to contain his mischievous urges. One night, after delivering a lecture on demons, Roxy tells Rudeus she is also a demon. They can be distinguished by their hair color, and it is probably the reason why Zenith and Paul were surprised to see her on the first day. However, she warns Rudeus to maintain distance from people with emerald green hair and red gemstone on their forehead. She further scares him by saying that getting too close to these demons may result in his family's elimination. Rudeus promises to be careful. At just 4 years of age, Rudeus's hard work has paid off, and he has become adept at magic. However, he has a long way to go when it comes to sword fighting. It is said old fears are difficult to overcome, which is probably why Rudeus didn't get along with his classmates in his previous life and was often bullied by them. The experience of being bullied led him to live a life as a loner. Even now, he cannot bring himself to approach kids his age, so he hides when 2 village kids playing by themselves look at him. Roxy comes to see if he's doing fine and tells him about the kingdom of Renoa, situated on the far side of the mountains. The Renoa Magic University, considered the world's #1 magic school, is located there. She recommends he takes modern and advanced courses there if he wants to go down the road of magic, but Rudeus is a bit hesitant. The new world that Rudeus lives in has a tradition of celebrating their birthday every 5 years instead of every year like on Earth in his previous life. Rudeus is 5 years old, and his family prepares a feast for him. His father gifts him a brand new sword and a long lecture on how a sword can come in handy in all sorts of situations, unlike magic. But he gets a warning from Zenith, and his speech abruptly ends. It is his mum's turn, and she presents him with a book on magic. Rudeus is very happy as the book is exactly what he wanted, and Zenith can hardly contain her excitement upon hearing this. Roxy gives him a wand with a red-coloured magic stone on top. The wand is used to amplify his magic powers. Roxy feels her work is done there as she has taught him everything she could. She informs him she will conduct his graduation exam the next day. Rudeus then remembers in his previous life, the bullying at school forced him to never leave his house. For the next 20 years he remained confined in his home, until one day when he was kicked out and then died. The next day Roxy tells him they will conduct the test outside the village. Fear grips Rudeus and he hides behind Zenith, but Roxy encourages him to let go of any fears holding him back and makes him sit on her horse while she mounts at the back. Together they set off on their journey. Rudeus soon realizes that his fear is irrational as no one in the village will look down upon him. His nerves ease a bit and he greets everyone on their way. Once they arrive in an open field, they stop, and Roxy explains she will cast saint-level water magic. She tells him to observe her and replicate the spell. Roxy casts the spell and the atmosphere suddenly changes around them. The sunny blue sky turns grey as it gets covered by dark clouds, when suddenly a loud neigh breaks Roxy's concentration, and she realizes her horse has been struck by lightning. She uses healing magic on her horse and asks Rudeus to not say anything about this. It is Rudeus's turn, and Roxy stays back to protect her horse this time. Rudeus casts a spell much bigger than Roxy's and passes the graduation test with flying colours. This earns him the title of Water Saint as a ranked magician. That evening, Roxy bids farewell to the family. Teaching Rudeus has made her realise she has much more to learn, so she must travel the world. Zenith and Paul bawl their eyes out while Rudeus runs after her and thanks her once again for everything she has taught him, and most importantly, for taking him out in the world, which could never have happened on his own. She gave him all the gifts he needed to venture out into the world. So starting the next day, he decides to go out and play. His parents couldn't be more proud of him for taking the initiative, as they were worried he might end up living at home his entire life. Rudeus is enjoying his stroll along the fields when he notices 3 kids throwing dirt at someone. He hates bullying but doesn't interfere until one of them picks up a rock and is about to throw it at the person. Rudeus stops the attack by throwing water balls at them, which makes them give up and leave. Rudeus rushes to the child's aid and finds that he's just a little boy with green hair, but no red gemstone on his forehead. Rudeus breathes a sigh of relief and helps him clean up. The boy tells Rudeus that his dad is a half-elf, but his hair colour matches neither of his parents. Saying this, he starts sobbing, and Rudeus tries his best to calm him down. Once he has cleaned up, they start walking back. and Rudeus extends a hand of friendship after introducing himself. The shy boy introduces himself as Sylph. They play until Sylph's parents arrive to take him home at sunset. Rudeus also returns but finds an angry Paul waiting for him outside the house. He doesn't allow Rudeus to explain what happened and starts yelling at him for what he did to the neighbor's kid. It turns out that one of the bullies from earlier had come with his mother to complain about Rudeus. Paul had promised to look into the matter, which explains why he was so mad at his son. But when Rudeus refused to apologize as he was being denied his right to be heard, Paul slaps him. With the wit that Rudeus possesses from his previous life, he sarcastically says that if next time he sees 3 people bullying someone, he won't stop them. In fact, will join them in bullying someone who is not defending himself. Paul finds himself in a pickle and apologizes for acting rashly and not giving Rudeus a chance to explain himself. Rudeus forgives him, and they enter the house as if nothing happened. But the incident leaves a mark on Paul as he realizes how mature his son has become. After that day, the bullies came after Sylph a few times, but Rudeus was always there to protect his friend. One of the bullies' mother often came to Rudeus's home to yell at him, but Rudeus believed she visited because she is in love with Paul. Rudeus has been teaching Sylph magic, and his magic capacity has increased a lot in just half a year. Sylph also manages to learn to use magic without chanting thanks to Rudeus. One day after playing, it starts to rain, and they reach Rudeus's home soaking wet. Rudeus proposes they shower and get into some dry clothes, but as Rudeus strips, Sylph hesitates. So Rudeus helps him take off his top, but when he does, he learns Sylph is actually a girl. He is too stunned to explain himself when his father comes after hearing Sylph crying. Paul gives Rudeus a chance to explain himself, but Rudeus just apologizes as he genuinely feels bad for making her cry. Now he understands why he thought Sylph was pretty when he first saw her. Paul also tells him that Sylph's actual name is Sylphiette. Rudeus wonders if she will ever forgive him, and Paul assures him that she will forgive him if he apologizes from the bottom of his heart. Paul takes Rudeus to the kitchen where Sylphiette is sitting. Rudeus apologizes and adds that since her hair has always been short, he thought she was a boy. Hearing this makes Sylphiette wail again, and Paul questions his son's social skills. The next day, while practicing sword fighting, Rudeus seems to lose focus, and Paul thinks it's because he hasn't made up with Sylphiette. He decides to help his son, and with his guidance of being a player, Rudeus is able to make up with Sylphiette, and they become friends again. Soon there is another reason to celebrate in the family. Zenith is pregnant and Paul is fawning over his wife. However, their happiness soon takes a detour at dinner when Lilia also announces she is pregnant. Paul can't contain his guilt and confesses that he is the father, angering his wife. She gets up from her chair and smacks him hard on his face. The atmosphere gets tense after the revelation, and the 2 women sit across each other at the table. Zenith asks Lilia what she plans to do now, and Lilia states that after helping Zenith deliver the baby, she will return to her hometown to raise her own kid there. But Zenith is concerned that Lilia would lose a lot of energy after birth. Traveling on a horse to her hometown, which would take a month, will be strenuous. Rudeus can see Zenith struggling because even though Lilia is a maid, she has done a lot around the house. Rudeus also doesn't want anything to happen to Lilia if she is sent away because she has kept his prized possession, Roxy's underpants, a secret. After much contemplation, Rudeus decides it is time to pay her back for her services, and he approaches a tense Zenith. He convinces her that it is Paul's fault and says that he saw the whole thing. Rudeus tells his mother that Paul forced himself on Zenith. Paul is shocked that Rudeus broke the bro code, but at the moment that lie is necessary to save Lilia. He promises himself to make it up to Paul once things settle. Rudeus convinces Zenith to let Lilia stay and everything works out well, except for Paul, who gets an earful that night. Lilia still doesn't know why Rudeus saved her when she was the one who seduced Paul. She has always thought of Rudeus as being possessed since he would always play with women's underpants and stare at her. But that doesn't matter now. And she promises herself that she will serve Rudeus all her life for saving her. She will also let her child serve Rudeus. Time flies by and the family welcomes 2 baby girls, Norn and Aisha. Rudeus also fixes things with his father. He thinks his dad can be a scumbag sometimes, but that doesn't change the fact that he always goes to Paul for advice about girls. That afternoon, while playing with Sylphiette, Rudeus seems quieter than usual. She asks him what's wrong, and he tells her that he feels stuck in his magic and swordsman skills. He feels he needs to leave the village in order to learn new things. But Sylphiette starts bawling because she doesn't want her best friend to go anywhere. So Rudeus decides to put his plan on hold. Later that night, while Rudeus is lost in his pervy thoughts about Sylphiette, Paul enters his room and gives him a letter from Roxy. Roxy writes that she is staying in the Shironi kingdom and has been hired as a tutor of the 7th prince. She further writes that the 7th prince reminds her of Rudeus because he is also intelligent and a perv. She has also improved her magic skills and wonders if Rudeus has already surpassed her. She suggests that if he has stopped making progress in magic, he should apply for Renoa Magic University. After giving it much thought, Rudeus tells Paul his wish to enroll in the Renoa Magic University. Since Sylphiette doesn't want him to leave, he wants her to come as well. He asks if his father is willing to pay her tuition fees as her family is not that rich. However, Paul refuses because he thinks Rudeus is still young and not fully trained in sword fighting. He also tells Rudeus that they cannot afford to pay extra tuition fees as they are running low on funds. Rudeus understands and asks for Paul's permission to get a job so that he can earn money for Sylphiette's tuition fee until he is old enough to enroll. Paul agrees and Rudeus is more than happy, but little does he know that Paul has planned something big for him. So the next day they are visited by a beast of a woman who is more muscular than Paul. They seem to know each other a little too well, and even Zenith greets her. Suddenly Rudeus is ambushed by Paul attacking him. After a brief battle he is knocked out by Paul, and when he gains consciousness, he finds himself in a moving chariot with the beast woman. The woman introduces herself as Ghislaine and welcomes him as they will start working together the next day. Rudeus is confused but dares not to question her. She gives him a letter and asks Rudeus to read it aloud as she cannot read. It is from Paul, who has written the letter to explain what is going on. Rudeus reads aloud that Paul doesn't trust that Ghislaine will be able to explain the situation well to Rudeus as he thinks her brain is nothing but muscles. Ghislaine is enraged and is about to give Rudeus a demo of her strength, but Rudeus handles the situation and says it is just a joke. He continues reading and realizes he is being sent to tutor a 9-year-old lady living in Roa. Paul explains that Ghislaine is the bodyguard and sword teacher of the said household. In return for teaching Rudeus swordsmanship, she would like to learn something from him. He is being sent to the household for 5 years and is expected to help the little girl master basic subjects. During his stay, he is not allowed to go home or write letters to his family. This is because Paul noticed how dependent Rudeus has become on Sylphiette, and he has decided it is not good for her either. So by living an independent life, he will learn a lot, and his family cannot wait to meet the new version of Rudeus. Rudeus understands it is probably best for him and Sylphiette, and wishes that she learns to solve her problems on her own as well. They soon reach a new town and meet many beasts in the household he'll be staying in. He is then introduced to Philip Grey Rat, the mayor of the town and Paul's cousin. Philip sighs when he realizes Paul has omitted to mention some things as usual to get his way. Philip takes Rudeus to meet his daughter and warns that his daughter is selfish and is only close to a few people in the household. He introduces Rudeus to Eris, and as soon as Rudeus sees Eris, a shiver runs down his spine. Eris is fierce, and he can feel it even from a distance. He greets her chivalrously, but Eris is not having it and slaps Rudeus because she thinks he's disrespecting her. Rudeus retaliates and slaps her back to make her feel how he felt. But that somehow activates beast mode in Eris, and she pins him down to land several punches on his face. Rudeus manages to throw her off of him using magic and makes a run for his life. As he hides under the table from fire-breathing Eris, he can't help but feel that Eris is the main character from a delinquent manga. He finally manages to lose her and goes to meet Philip, who can't stop laughing. Philip asks if he wants to give up, but Rudeus is determined and doesn't want Paul to laugh at him if he returns. So he devises a plan to trick Eris into studying and describes his plan to Philip. Later, he retires to his room and instantaneously falls asleep. When he wakes up, he finds himself in a wooden crate with his hands tied. Rudeus looks around, appreciating Philip for how real they've made the setup look. It was his plan to teach Eris the importance of learning magic by putting her in a stressful situation. But when a huge man comes and starts beating Eris mercilessly, Rudeus feels the actor is being a little too harsh on her. He also lands a punch on Rudeus but leaves him alone when Rudeus winks at him. Once alone, Rudeus rushes to Eris's aid and heals her using healing magic. Something doesn't feel right, so Rudeus plans to escape instead of fighting. He breaks open the iron bars on the little window and blocks the door. The kidnapper tries to break in and Rudeus threatens to leave her until she promises she will not resort to violence or raise her voice. Eris gives in and promises right before the kidnappers return. As soon as they're out, Eris breaks her promise and starts speaking loudly. So Rudeus leaves her there and starts back on his own. Realizing she isn't out of danger yet, Eris comes running after him and promises never to talk loudly again. They realize they are in the town beside Roa. Rudeus takes the opportunity to make Eris realize how reading and basic math could help her to travel alone and save her life. They board a carriage and return to Roa that night. While walking back, they run into one of the servants of the household and suddenly Eris is taken away by the kidnappers. Rudius chases them and stops their attempt only to find out that the servant is involved in the crime. The servant tries to lure Rudius with the prize money and says he has suffered a lot at the hands of Eris. For Rudius, however, money doesn't matter, and at that point he's thinking of Eris and her safety. He creates fireworks that burst in the sky, and taking advantage of the distraction, Rudius attacks the men head-on and pulls Eris away. Rudius manages to ward off all of their attacks, but when one of them throws his sword at Rudius, he realizes he is going to die. Rudius regrets not learning how to defend himself against the sword and closes his eyes, ready to bear the consequences. All of a sudden, the blade breaks into pieces, and in a split second, the two kidnappers' heads burst open. It was Ghislaine who had rushed to the site after seeing the fireworks. Rudius is awestruck by the sheer power of Ghislaine and can't speak the entire journey back to Eris's home. Ghislaine has the traitor servant tied, and as soon as Philip sees him tied up, he understands what must have happened. Rudius feels bad that, in the end, he couldn't help Eris, and Ghislaine was the one who saved them. He is disappointed at his own abilities and starts to leave when Eris returns to her normal loud self. But she stops him and says she has given an exclusive right to him to address her as Eris, implying she is hiring him as her tutor. A bright smile spreads across Rudius's face, and he returns happy that his efforts weren't a waste after all. The next day, Philip invites Rudius for a game of chess and to discuss the incident that ensued yesterday. It has been decided that they'll tell people Ghislaine solved everything in order to show people that the Grey Rat family has welcomed a Sword King. It is also to ensure that Rudius is kept a secret. Rudius has the opportunity to meet Philip's wife, Hilda, who is colder than Antarctica, and Eris's grandfather, Sauros Grey Rat, an aggressive man who talks with his fists first. He asks Rudius to teach Eris magic, as she seems obsessed with how Rudius could use magic so effortlessly. But Rudius takes a chance and makes Sauros understand that by asking on Eris's behalf, he will be raising her into an adult who won't ask for anything herself. Sauros finds his argument rational and calls for Eris. He asks her to request that Rudius teach her magic. When she finally manages to utter those words, Rudius freezes, shocked that she acted like a bunny girl just in order to ask. Rudius soon starts teaching Ghislaine and Eris magic while he sharpens his swordsmanship skills with Eris under Ghislaine's guidance. It has been a month since he started tutoring Eris, but Eris doesn't listen to Rudius's lessons when it comes to math, reading and writing. She is only interested in magic, and when she's bored with her studies, she would just run away in the middle of class. Even if he found her, she would punch him and run away again. One day when she runs off in the middle of the lecture, Rudius goes after her and finally finds her sleeping on a stack of hay in the barn. He tries waking her up, but when she doesn't, he lets his hands run amok until Eris wakes up and sees them in her skirt. She makes sure to punch his soul out of his body. Left with no choice, he goes to Ghislaine and cries to make her step in. Eris finally sits to study, but more than that, she complains about how boring the lecture is. So Ghislaine tells a story about how she ran into trouble because she didn't know basic math and got lost in the desert. She had to survive by eating monster poop, which led her to suffer from diarrhea and nausea. Oddly enough, the story motivates Eris, and she asks Rudius to continue his lesson. Days fly by, and soon enough it is autumn. One day Eris drags Rudius to accompany her to visit the market of Roa. There, Rudius makes a note of the prices of the products, and a shopkeeper offers him an aphrodisiac potion which arouses women. When Eris interrupts and asks what it is, he recovers and poses a math problem for her to solve. Later that day, Rudius bestows an important life lesson on Eris when she offers to buy him a book that he really wants, but with her father's money. He refuses and says he'll take the offer when Eris offers to pay with money she has earned. Eris surprisingly understands and doesn't throw a tantrum as she would normally do. Impressed by her composure, Rudius promises to ask Philip to give Eris an allowance every month, bringing a smile to Eris's face. It is already evening and the three are returning when Rudius gets spooked by a giant shadow casting over them. He is even more surprised to see a flying castle. Ghislaine explains it is the armoured Dragon King, Perugius's sky castle. Seeing Rudius confused, Eris explains that Pergius is one of the three heroes who defeated demon god Laplace, an evil warlord who tried to exterminate the human race. Rudius feels he has heard the story somewhere and suddenly remembers the book that Paul used to read to him, which he thought was a fairy tale. He is excited and hopes he gets to go to the castle someday. After that day, Rudius begins his policy of giving Eris one day off a week, which seems to work well as Eris appears to be in a good mood lately. She even presents Rudius with a medicine bottle he seemed interested in the other day when they went to the market. Rudius starts sweating, seeing the bottle before him, and Eris asks what it is. Rudius dodges the question and tries running away but gets caught by Ghislaine, and in the process the bottle slips through his hands and breaks upon falling on the ground. Rudius sulks and inadvertently mentions that it is an aphrodisiac. He soon realizes he is in trouble and starts running, but Ghislaine again catches hold of him and Eris tickles him, forcing him to tell her what aphrodisiac is. But Rudeus will endure anything to cover his perverted secret. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Jobless Reincarnation. If you want to find out what happens next, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Panorama Anime, and comment for the next episode.